Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. The gang's all here, and we're having a jolly good time. James, welcome back. Jim, it's been a minute. Where'd you go?
I know it's been a minute. It's crazy. It's great to be back. I feel like I just a scheduling nightmare, and man, I feel like I'm back home finally. Fantastic.
I recorded a bunch of episodes at Zero Trust World in Orlando, so I'm going to carpet bomb the feed with those for a bit. I got to talk to Mark over here and a couple of other interesting people. I saw Adrian Sanabria again. That was kind of fun. And I don't know where this episode is going to slot in, but this is either before or after Marcus Hutchins, which super interesting interview. He's going to be one of those people that people either really like or really don't. But let's go with the guest we have right now, and that is this guy above me here. Sir, kindly introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, G. Mark Hardy. I have a podcast called CISO Tradecraft because I've been told I had a face for radio. And so in that endeavor, I provide weekly podcasts for people who want to be or who are aspiring to be chief information security officers. So my content's more focused on leadership, organizational behavior, high-level decisions, not so much here's how to hack. There's plenty of great podcasts out there for that. In my real life, I run a business called National Security Corporation doing CISO work. And 30 years of misspent youth in the Navy. At some point in my life, along the line, retired as a Navy captain. And
I feel like I should have the "in the Navy" in the background for you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I remember the Navy was into that for recruiting. It's like, yeah, you guys are not really understanding what this song is, but that's okay. It sounded good.
But you can sail the 7 seas. Anyway,
and catch a strange disease. Yes,
that's right.
I think that was the next verse.
Sure. Maybe I'm not gonna. Okay, now I'm not gonna go look it up because that's
are enough of your podcast listeners old enough to remember when that came out? And the
oh my god,
things like that.
What year was that?
There's a question for your Google search. You got a whole staff here. Let's find out. First answer wins. This is like the other thing you do is Hacker Jeopardy. Did that at Vegas for years.
Yes.
Surveys. Okay, the year that in the Navy came out.
1979.
Not in the form of a question.
Oh, what year? You were the village people in 1979. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, this has started off just good and fun. For those of you that haven't turned this off yet, because you're not in our age range.
Let me tell you about my prostate. You know, we're gonna get the old person show.
Whoa! That's the next podcast. Give me a couple more years. We'll get in that one too. You know you're getting to that certain age. We're like, yeah, it's next week. Anyway, all right. So, cybersecurity. Hey,
a choice between slim and none. Always take slim.
Right? That's right.
Okay, and that's why lottery tickets sell, because it's got a very slim chance, but it's not a zero chance.
I mean,
statistically, someone's going to win the lottery this week. Statistically, you're not winning the lottery this week, nor me, or anybody you know. But yeah, let's talk about CISOs. So the job's been around since Steve Katz first kind of formalized that role, and it has gone forward where, to a certain extent, we often think of that as sort of that's your career pinnacle if you're a cybersecurity person. Often you start out technical, and then you work your way up to management, and you get to leadership roles, and if you're good at politics, you can go ahead and have that C-level. But a lot of times, the CISO job is a little c ISO, instead of like the big C, like a CEO, a CIO, a CFO, and things like that. And what that means is that a lot of organizations haven't really given the CISOs the opportunity to, if you will, sit at the grown-ups table as a result of often our communications skills. If we grew up technical and we go to a board of directors and want to talk technical stuff, hey, yeah, we had a breach. It turned out that we had an IP packet coming in from .cn and went ahead and it breached this, and the Fortinet picked it up. But they don't understand at all what you're talking about. And like, this guy's a weirdo. Get him out of the room. But if you walk in there and you say, our intellectual property is the foundation of the value of this company, and we're under a decisive attack from intellectual property thieves in China, using them as an example, that if they're successful in breaching our defenses, we could lose 20% market share, drop our stock price 40%. And like, well, what do we do? Well, if we put this and this defense in place, for about 3% of what the revenue is going to be that we will maintain, we will preserve that and going forward and protect our shareholders. And like, it's done. But it's that communication's different. So here's what's happening in the CISO communities. We're facing competition. What? Most of us start out in cybersecurity. Hey, we think, hey, I can get that big CISO job up there. But people from GRC, people from legal, some of those folks are getting the CISO jobs. And you're like, wait a minute, you're not technical. Why can you be there? First of all, if you start talking technology at the CISO level with the people you're normally communicating with, peers and above, you lose. Secondly, the people who are getting some of those jobs are those who their career had allowed them to successfully communicate that level of board interaction over and over and over again. And as a result, what happens? They're good at it, and they say, "Hey, we know this person," and things such as that. And then, lastly, I think that as we look at it from a career perspective, there's been a lot of recent cases. I mean, Tim Brown was sort of the poster child for the chief incident scapegoat officer, where all of a sudden something goes wrong, and not only do people look for a person to blame, but the SEC was looking for someone to blame, and with personal lawsuits and a nightmare. I had a chance to talk with Tim. I had him on my show last year when I was over at Black Hat. We just sat down and we grabbed the microphone and we talked about it, the experience. And now that those charges have been dropped with prejudice, and when something is dropped with prejudice, it means it can't come back. Then he was free to talk about that experience. So there's been a bit of a chilling effect, I think, as a result of those SEC actions. We don't know in this administration if they will pursue as aggressively as the last administration. There has been the competition for that top level job from other career paths where people don't see it coming. Why does she have the job? Because she knows how to speak the language at the executive suite. And then finally, it's people who are getting perhaps a little bit discouraged about the concept of the chief incident scapegoat officer, the responsibility without the authority, the misconstrued way that this job is set up. Because when you walk in, you haven't said, do I have my errors and omissions insurance? Do I have this director insurance, and things such as that?
So can I, without going into specific cases, I think you'll find this crew, the three of us, a little skeptical on the universal chief scapegoat officer kind of thing talk, because cyber executives, leaders, not executives, cyber leaders have for many, many years clamored that we don't get to see at the big kids table. Nobody listens to us. We're just over here, doing this job. It's super hard. We stay up all night. We get, little sleep. We drink too much and don't see our families enough. And then like somewhere around, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, maybe a little bit more, that lowercase c became a capital C, and you became a corporate executive. And suddenly people found out that's not so fun, that there are responsibilities that go along with it. For example, if you make statements that are factually incorrect to people in the government, that can be prosecuted. You find out that, yes, you do have to have E&O. Yes, you do have to have your own policies. And it's good to talk to a lawyer before, taking this job. You mentioned, accountability without the ability to influence change. Yeah, that's a real thing. That happens a lot more than anybody wants to talk about, because, you talk long enough about the desire to go be accountable people, and particularly in corporations where the risk from technology isn't well understood. They're like, yeah, sure, you can be an officer. Let me just add you to the list of people who will be named in the lawsuit. Right? There's plenty of that going on, but I think that is on balance with the folks that got themselves into, we'll say, failed up, super, well versed in technology, good at the job, became the de facto CISO, right? And it was okay that you weren't a really good corporate executive because you weren't really an executive, and then you became a corporate executive, and that was really exposed. So I think that there's a couple of things that are happening in that you've got suddenly many more companies, particularly public companies, are being required to have a chief information security officer, an executive named as part of the person responsible for technology risk. And then kind of the folks that don't understand the problem they get, the job they're getting themselves into, and those I've seen those collide real hard in the industry. And I think that's some of what we're seeing, because I think it's easy to say, the climate is right for, this job to be abused by, the people that hire someone into this as a scapegoat. But I would say, like, you got to know what you're walking into, and if you don't, some of that's on you.
And I would agree with you completely on there. Is that you have to kind of look at it going in the front door, and nowadays it's almost what is on your short list, and like, am I on the D&O policy, directors and officers for the coverage? But I had one vCISO job that I went through and went through all the stuff. Client looked good, rates were good. They actually wanted a longer contract and things like that. And said, hey, this is fine. And then after I did all the work and things such as that, I ended up signing this contract. And they said, oh, by the way, you get to brief the board of directors next month. Wonderful. I could do that. Said, oh yeah, we had a major breach, and you get to do that. Brief. It's like, wait a minute. Okay, that wasn't on my bingo card. It is now when I go ahead and talk to companies. But it turned out that they had had a log4j vulnerability in one of the web modules that was used for registration, and somebody had inserted 5 lines of code that every time you registered or put in a credit card number, a copy went to that other URL. And it's like, yeah, come on, really? So looked into it and said, all right, we're going to stop taking credit cards and we're going to authorize.net. We're going to take a look at what the maximum liability is and things such as that and the like. And so here's a quick question here. I'm going to call a quick timeout on the field. Jim, could you mute your microphone because the feedback is horrible?
Oh my, okay. My apologies, gentlemen.
You're a view meeting all over the place. Thank you. All right, so if you edit out, otherwise that's the problem of doing live broadcast. Okay, so back to your original show already in progress. And so what I found then is that when you look at, as a CISO walking in the door, you have a couple due diligence that you need to do. By the way, it worked out quite well because we went to the board, presented them, here's the problem, here's a solution, here's why it's never going to be a problem again because they're not taking credit cards, here's the maximum liability we have under civil law, and there's no criminal penalties, and likely outcome is going to be we just file a bunch of paperwork and it goes away because the world's had breach fatigue. And that's exactly what happened. The board's like, okay, fine, next. And the person hired was like, wait a minute, I was scared to death of these people. I said, A, tell the truth. B, go in there with an action plan that's business oriented.
Yeah.
And then, of course, follow through. And if you do all that, then it works out really, really well. So that's one thing up front. The second one is you have to assess the environment. If you're the third CISO in 11 months to be working there, something's up. The other thought is that ask around. We're a pretty tight community, and there's ways that you can find out whether a particular opportunity is a setup or whether it is a genuine career advancement possibility. And then I've got friends like Larry Whiteson. He's done, I think, 8 different CISO jobs. He says, I'm done with that. I'm going to go do my startup stuff. Enough headaches, enough heartaches, enough hair falls out or turns gray. But the serial CISO, the person who goes from company to company to company, that's a good question to ask, is that, are they doing that because the opportunities blow up? Are they doing it because they get bored or they get burned out? Or is it part of a normal career progression where you accumulate bigger and bigger responsibilities such that eventually you say, hey, I'm a CISO at a Fortune X, whatever value X is important to you, and then I've achieved and unlocked that next level. So let's think about it from a career perspective as well as the organization. Now, if the culture there, the organization is one of blame, if it's one where you go in there and say, look, here are the resources that I need to get this job done. That's really part, some upfront interviewing, but also part of your 90-day plan. And if you have an organization that says, nope, we're not going to fund you. Okay, well, you're the board, you're the CEO, you can accept risk. Here, sign right here, you're accepting risk, and go ahead and press hard, you're making 3 copies. If they're willing to do that, and then something goes wrong, you've got kind of the CYA paperwork. Because when you talk about responsibility and accountability and authority, if you have the responsibility to get something done, you can delegate that. Okay, I have to clean the floor, but tell my son, yeah, you're responsible for cleaning the floor. And the authority to do so rests with me as a CISO, if you will, to say, go do this on behalf of the organization. But ultimately, accountability doesn't shift. If the person I say, go do this, go make this happen, and they don't do it, I can't go ahead to my boss and say, well, don't blame me because you hired lousy people. He was here when I got here and he just screwed things up. That is not what this thing is. And so we often say, as a leadership tenet, when things go well, pass the credit down because credit is infinitely divisible. When things go wrong, you absorb that and you take the hit. Now, when your people see that you are shielding them from the nasty stuff that might roll down for the organization, they're going to appreciate that. They're going to appreciate that you're not blaming them and that you're not pushing them into the, let me put you in front of the truck or under the bus. But at the same time, that type of relationship has to work both ways. So as a CISO, you're not a force of one. Unless you're in a really small organization, then you are. You're usually interacting with a team that has been assigned to you or that you select. You're having to work with IT. So you can go ahead and say, hey guys, you need to put this stuff into what you're doing. But then also the other business units. And this is where the C level comes in, where you go ahead and you don't go ahead and become the department of no, saying, yeah, you can't do that. Oh, I don't want you using that AI tool. And I'm sorry, you can't connect with that. Be the department of how and why. What do I mean by that? How do I? Yeah. Okay. You cut me off. Too much.
Yeah,
coffee,
I'm gonna take a sip. I'm gonna because you said the magic word risk, and this is one of those things I think the three of us here could have some conversations on. My take is this: there are as many ways to calculate risk as there are grains of sand on the beach, maybe more. And everybody thinks they've got the right formula, and it seems like for a while we were going towards the more complex the better. I'm a fan of simplicity, but some of these uber complex risk formulas that calculate dollar loss to per unreviewed, untriaged event, blah blah blah. Some of that, as you said at the beginning, if the people you're talking to, whether it's the board or it's the your fellow C-level executives, if they don't understand what you're saying, you might as well be making things up. And I feel like at least some of the time we are, right? Because I've seen ROI calculations on security projects where I'm glad it makes sense to somebody because it didn't make sense to me. Lately, it's been in a big way as we'll say the macro of the market seems to get more complicated. There's a whole lot less certainty across the job market, the financial markets, the global politics, right? So everything's heading towards uncertainty, which means computers getting high scale computes getting cheaper, uncertainty is getting higher, global tensions are rising. Perfect place for really bad actors to do really bad things in a big way. And then budgets start to shrink because they're not infinite. And we've been spending a lot for a long time on a lot of crap that we haven't implemented well. Where does this end up, Mark? Because I don't want to say like this is we did a lot of this to ourselves because we've overspent, we've under implemented, we've aggrandized our roles, but we kind of have, and we kind of did, and we kind of are.
Well, let's think about it. You had mentioned the word uncertainty. So let me ask you, what is your definition of risk?
Oh, boy.
All right, let me make it more complicated. You have two words.
Unmitigated surprise, to quote Dan Gear.
Do we go out to the audience? The definition I came up with was measurable uncertainty. Now let's dissect that a little bit because I think it's right in line with what you're saying. If something is not uncertain, it's not a risk. I cannot go to insurance companies and say, I think the sun's not going to rise in the east, it's going to rise in the west. And so I'm going to give you $1,000. And if somehow that sun does rise in the east, you're going to pay me a premium. Like, no, that's not going to happen because there's a certainty involved in something like that. If there's a risk of saying, I want to be protected against, I don't know, something that you can't even measure because there's no data on it, then you can't insure that as well. And that's usually where they put exclusions in your insurance policy, like force majeure, active war, zombie apocalypse, things such as that, where they don't have enough statistics for it. But if you can't measure it, then you can't manage it. And therefore, it's not a risk function that you can work with. And again, it's back to talking executive speak, if you will. Executives from the security perspective, IT, care about risk. They don't care a lot about your technology and the whole suite of products that you keep buying. And I face that now as a CISO, is that I look at my suite, and each time something comes up for renewal, is there an overlap? Is this completely overlap with something else? Can I get rid of it? And if the answer is it's going to leave a gap, is that gap an acceptable risk? That is to say, the probability of something getting through that gap is low enough that I could go to the executive and say, you can save X amount of money if you accept this amount of risk. And that's the discussion that we should be having.
So you said you said one of the things that we talked about on this podcast a couple of times with the lawyers and the insurance folks. We talk about the act of war, right? With the amount of nation state sponsored activity, it's not a huge stretch to call a major incident an act of war because it was done by a nation state actor. In fact, that's been tried a couple of times, and unfortunately, it's been successful. I think there's lots of one on your definition of risk. I like it. I call it the unmitigated surprise, right? Because it's something you're surprised about that you have no answer for. I think we're essentially saying the same thing. You probably have more concise wording, but I want to ask, how do you quantify something that and I'll put the background on it. We had Patrick Dennis on a couple of weeks ago, a couple of episodes back, and he talked about like you're going up against, to try to get budget, up against a risk to the business that is uncertain, right? Just because you have a vulnerability open doesn't mean it'll get exploited. You could have your password admin for your, I don't know, financial whatever, and it doesn't mean it'll ever get exploited. The odds are high, but it doesn't mean it's not guaranteed. Now, when you're going up against something like, let's just quote the thing of the moment, AI, right? Which in some cases becomes an existential crisis to the existence of the business. If I can't compete because my competitors are using AI and they're creating new ideas in minutes and it's taking me months, then I'll be out of business. Like existential crisis versus uncertain risk, like real versus maybe. This is where cyber falls down quite a bit. And we've been using the math that on kind of on a sufficient timeline, the risk of survival always goes to zero, right? Like at some point, everything gets breached. Some things get breached faster. Some things result in bigger, what do we call that? My brain just psych vaulted. Anyway, blast radiuses. That's what I meant to say. But this is a job where, as a CISO, you're trying to quantify a risk that is uncertain versus insurance, where they have actuarials and real data on the odds of something happening and potentially decades, if not hundreds of 100 years of data in some cases, right? Health insurance is like that, car insurance is like that, homeowners insurance is like that. Cyber's getting there, but it's not there yet. What's the catalyst for making this less art and more science? I guess I'll open that up to anybody, because Mark, maybe you know, but James?
I was just going to kind of point out a couple things. One is, I think there's a lot of talk about actuarial data in some of these cases. On one side of the argument is we don't have enough. I would argue we actually have a lot. Thanks to insurance companies who basically invented the entire concept when buildings were burning down to the ground in the 1800s. But the advent of them playing a major role in sort of regulatory oversight and standards for construction, right? So we see that sort of evolution. On the other side, you say we don't have enough of it, or rather that the threat spectrum is so dramatically changing, unlike, say, fire. You have a certain temperature, you have a certain airflow, you have a certain source of oxygen and fuel for the fire. That's that's formulaic. Whereas with cyber, it becomes more difficult because the threat dynamic and this sort of push to make everything constantly innovative and keep kind of moving the business forward doesn't necessarily bode well. And so I think it's hard to bring a great deal more science to it. And I think, frankly, Raph, you hit the nail on the head. I think we have a tendency of generally collectively talking to the board like they don't understand risk or something, and somewhat not fully aware of the fact that they're dealing with much more complex elements of risk, other than just, is my IT system exposed? Now, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying is that there are things that kind of move the needle a little bit, but there's a lot of barriers to improving the science around it, if for no other reason, the simple speed of change of businesses and the role of IT and the speed of change within the threat spectrum.
I don't even think we have science with it. How do you put science to something that changes so quickly? The risk has typically been gut felt, whether you're talking about using CVSS or any risk matrix. It's still a gut feeling of, oh, I feel this way, that this will get exploited or it won't get exploited in the near future. Because with the speed at which things are going in technology, that thing that was out there that wasn't that big of a deal today, AI just created it to be a big deal tomorrow. Or a new scanner was just generated to do this. I mean, there was just a story this morning about Salesforce with one of their pieces, a tool that existed for something else just got modified to scan for that and go deeper. If that hadn't happened, that risk didn't change. But then all of a sudden, somebody does something tomorrow and it completely changes. So I think that's what makes it so difficult, is that and all these third-party components, right? Oh, there's all these vulnerabilities in third-party components. We're not vulnerable to that. We don't use that piece. We didn't know we were vulnerable today until tomorrow. And I think that's what makes it so much more difficult when we look at it from this versus other areas like the fire starting or something like that. Like, that's pretty stagnant, the way things are changing now. What was fine today is not potentially tomorrow, but we don't know what that algorithm looks like.
Mark, over to you then. How do we, what James said makes sense. How do you combat that? Or how do you operate in a world where the only thing that's certain is uncertainty? And the pace at which uncertainty evolves.
Yeah, well, welcome to the fog of war, as Clausewitz had talked about, where everything's uncertain. Let's back up one step, because I think James and Jim had some excellent insights here. So when we talk about risk, measurable uncertainty, if we use that as our operating definition, pretty much about 4 basic ways I can deal with risk. I can accept it. Hey, hold my beer, watch this. I'm going to go ahead and do whatever that thing is anyway that has a potential consequence. I could mitigate the risk by going ahead and putting in countermeasures, and that's our security budget, right? It's all about risk mitigation. Hey, we can reduce the likelihood of this bad thing happening, which would cost this, down to here, which would cost that, in exchange for, well, this much money. We could avoid the risk and just get out of that line of business. Say, yeah, I'm not going to jump out of an airplane. I'm not going to do something. Or I could assign the risk, and that's where the insurance comes in. Insurance is in the business of exchanging the variability, as you said, you don't know what it is, for some fixed amount. Now, if you're an automobile insurance or life insurance, you've got a lot of data. And I could go to the Social Security website right now, type in my year and month of birth, and it will tell me where the 50.0 percentile is of the month I'm going to die. Now, if I make it a little bit longer, then they push that out. But you could see where your bell curve is, and it follows you around in life. Automobile insurances have a ton of information, so they know what to do. Well, let's talk about cyber. I had a conversation a few years back where I had made kind of an offhand comment that insurance companies are not in the business of writing checks. They're in the business of cashing checks. And they have a hard time with cybersecurity because they don't have all this data like you would have for life insurance or car insurance. And this guy called me over afterwards and says, well, I work for the insurance company, and actually we do. We have probably more information in the cyber world. It's just not generally available. It's not that you can go to a public database. But if you set up almost like a lot of automobile insurance companies today want you to carry around these little spy devices which are hooked to your Bluetooth on your cell phone that says, drive safe and we'll save you some money. It's like, I don't like those things. I am a driver. Look at my driving record, okay? If I don't have any tickets, I don't have any accidents, if I don't have any moving violations, I'm probably a safe driver, and I don't want to send that information up there. But for 30% reduction in my insurance premium, which I don't get for auto, but you might get it for cyber, you might agree to it. How does insurance company look at it right now? SOC 2, okay. Or we'll fill out a 434 question questionnaire where you do your self-assessment. That's all self-reporting. Do you have this? Of course we do. Do you have this? Yes, we're going to get that. But nobody goes back there and pulls the string hard to see what you've got. So in an uncertain environment where you really don't have the data, that's where you have to rely on experience. And also, you rely a little bit in terms of your personal risk acceptance of the leadership. Elon Musk is probably going to be a lot less risk averse than, for example, Jamie Dimon, who's going to have to go ahead and comply. His whole career has been on complying with regulations, protecting money, the innovation that comes out of there. For a while, Dimon had said, Bitcoin's horrible, terrible, whatever. And of course, Elon's like, yay, crypto. Well, I think Dimon's come around once they realized they could make some money on it. So crypto was a really good idea of uncertainty. Is it going to take off or not? Do I sell my house? Do I sell my kids? And do I pile into Bitcoin when it's $100? And then all of a sudden it goes up, and I could have, should have, or 1,000 or 10,000, 100,000. And when you finally jump in, it's like, yeah, no, this is over. We don't have that data. We don't have enough to correlate geopolitical activity to economic activity to what a cryptocurrency is going to do.
Let me ask you,
there's a good example right there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about that. So in one sense, we're talking about measurable components, and then we recognize that it's almost impossible to measure. And I would say in between there is the change of that, right? So when we talk about the 4 ways of dealing with risk, the part I think a lot of people get focused on, understandably, because you can't tell the business you can't avoid it because the business is going to do it. Otherwise, it wouldn't come up in the first place in a lot of cases. As far as saying, hey, it's going to cost X to reduce that exposure, that true can get difficult. And what I've seen in the past is where you go, okay, I need $1 million to reduce that $20 billion risk. And you get the $1 million and you spend it. And then you go back and say, I need another $1 million. Well, I need 5 million this time, because the threat changed, the dynamic changed, the business knowingly or unknowingly introduced kind of scenarios that make that difficult. And so I sense there's a little bit of, what's the word? I don't want to use like exhaustion is not the right word I'm thinking of, but essentially is keep going back to the well for more money has created, I think, a degree of stress at the senior leadership, the capital C level when it comes to that conversation around risk. And of course, the insurance component, you can then tie it together, but I'm speaking specifically, how do you address scenarios where you express a risk at a value and here's the investment, and then a few days, months go by, and now the threat dynamics changed. How do you, and maybe what you the countermeasures you put in place are not exactly have remained in alignment. There's a sort of an additional another additional capex to that. What are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, it's like an old military aphorism: the enemy gets a vote. And so you may set up your plans very concisely and very correctly, but it's not a Maginot Line. And for those of us who remember our history, at the end of World War I, France went ahead and said, never again will Germany invade. So they built this big, giant barrier, the Maginot Line, covered with pillboxes and cement, and dead man's zone. You could never get across the no man's zone. So what did Germany do? They just end around through Belgium, 1940, and in we go. So the problem is you're building Maginot Lines, it's a waste of money because the attacker is just going to go around them potentially or find another approach. If you keep going back to the well for money, it means one of two things. Either you did not understand the situation initially and make a correct threat assessment, or as you had indicated, the threat has changed. That's a matter of education, understanding that now, for example, if you ask somebody 2 weeks ago from from this recording, what's your plan for gasoline prices and things like that? It's like, yeah, it's kind of trending down, it's like things like that. And all of a sudden, you get activity in the Middle East and straight up. Well, if you'd known that it was going straight up, you would have filled up all your tanks and you would have gotten extra canisters and things like that. Just using it as a simple personal example, because we all have very sensitive what we pay at the pump. So same thing. I go ahead and I have a static amount or a working amount of security defenses. Mostly we're talking about defense here. And then all of a sudden the threat level goes way up, where this may not be sufficiently appropriate. That's in a communications to the board. This threat level has changed. Keep them aware of that. They're no dummies. They know that when threats go up, if tariffs go up, if taxes go up, if competition comes up with a better product, if there are concerns in terms of the transportation not being able to get you from A to B, et cetera, with your products. All those things are well understood at the executive level. Translate your cyber into that. We can't go ahead and say, I need more money for transportation. Well, I'm sorry, you can't have it because we fixed your budget for the year. Gasoline prices just went up 40%. Sorry, you can't have any more money. That's the maximum for the year. Well, we're going to have to ship 40% less product. Well, that's unacceptable. That's your fault. Like, no, the world changed. So think about how we express that. If we keep coming back being product focused, tool focused, that's wrong, because the board doesn't understand the difference between, I want a Fortinet, or I want to go ahead and, hey, I've got all these risks that I'm facing on there, so let me go ahead and buy ThreatLocker because I like it and I think it's really good. It may in fact be the right answer, but how do you explain that? That's the communications gap that I try to cover, like with my little podcast. But more importantly, that in general, anybody who's trying to convince somebody of something has to make the value apparent to the person who's writing the check. And if you can translate your requirements into a value obtained by the person writing the check, you'll get your resources.
How do you?
So it's almost as like assigning security a component of success to the business, right? What's security's role in enabling and ensuring the business so that you can tie that back into a reasonable conversation? Sorry, go ahead, James.
I was just going to add the 4 ways to handle risk. When we talk about being able to offset to like insurance, how are people going back and reviewing that to be able to say, okay, these risks we're assigning to insurance, but insurance is changing, right? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, insurance probably would have covered your claim if you didn't have MFA. Now, good luck with that. It probably won't. So if you're taking things and you're saying, okay, this, we're going to do this, we're going to do here, we can put this here, or people reviewing that to be able to go back and say, hey, wait a minute, the stuff we thought we were okay here, now this wouldn't be covered by that anymore because the insurance requirements have changed. And now we need to make sure that we've got these other pieces in place. Is that something that people are having to contend with and go back and think about? Because I got to assume those, as insurance is learning more and more, right, they're coming back and saying, oh, hey, listen, you've got SMB exposed to the internet. Sorry, like that's it. Like we're not covering that. Whereas 10 years ago, before they had that information, that would have been fine.
Well, go get in an automobile accident when your BAL is about 0.12 and you're not wearing a seatbelt, and see if you're going to get paid by your insurance company. There's exclusions in there. They got terms and conditions, and the insurance companies write them in a way, to protect themselves, but also, in a certain extent, to stimulate healthy behavior on behalf of the policyholder. Not that they care whether you are healthy or not, but they do care about not having to pay premiums. And so if they could go ahead and say, hey, if I put this little monitoring device in my car, and maybe I'm not going to go drag racing, maybe I'm not going to race through a red light or something like that, I'll settle down a little bit, the thought that you're accountable for your behavior. If you take a look at how do we change behavior, they have the terms and conditions in the insurance. It says if you don't have MFA, and you ought to have MFA. I mean, MFA needs to be on pretty much everything, particularly admin requirements. And I think it was Waterloo, Ontario, or one of the townships up there that didn't have MFA. And 2 years later, they had an insurance claim, and they took them to the court. And the judge said, look, it says right here, you agreed to do this. It was part of your contract. You have a contract that you have something to perform, and you didn't perform what you agreed to do in the contract. And now you want them to pay you for not doing what you agreed to do? No. And so I think what we're seeing then is as you look at the concept of insurance, and the basic policy language is certainly changing as it gets more sophisticated, but look carefully at the exclusions. Exclusions represent those out of bounds activities. That's why Warren Buffett bought Geico, because you cannot lose money in car insurance. Because if there's enough data, you can moderate it. And if you're worried about a nuclear blast taking out 1 million cars, that's an exclusion.
Yeah, and all I know is car insurance never gets cheaper. Like
Yep.
ever. Mark, I'm gonna give you one final question to lead us out on, and that is if you give it a good shake and peer into the crystal ball or the magic 8 ball, and if I ask you to look 5 years out, is the role of the chief information security officer more prominent, less prominent, or nobody has any idea? Which one of those three would you say?
Yes. It's, Magic 8 Ball says it's uncertain. And I say it's uncertain why. Years ago, I wrote GMARC's corollary to Moore's Law, which I shortened to GMARC's Law. Half of what you know about security will be obsolete in 18 months. Well, think about 18 months. All those Windows 10 boxes were absolutely covered. Now they're not. You go back 2 cycles, 18 months. Nobody was using generative AI except for like 0.01% of the people. The rate of change that we have in our industry is so rapid that when you talk about 5 years out, you're 1, 2, 3 and a third generations, which means if you go to 50, 25, 12 and a half, it's like a Bitcoin halving almost. You're 10% relevant after 5 years in this industry if you've not re-educated yourself. As a result, I think that the role of the CISO is going to be largely determined by our impact in terms of being able to protect the organization, to steer it from a business perspective, to not just avoid risk, but to enable revenue. If you can say we can help you make more money because we're not only just holding on to the money that we have that might have gotten lost to bad guys, but we're empowering us to get into new businesses. We can AI enable our workforce and not take on the risk of it going overseas. Then I think you've got a more prominent role. If you sit back and hoard your tools and your budget, you're gonna lose.
And that's a good place to end. Mark, it's been fun, sir. Thank you. One, thank you for your service. Two, thank you for spending some time with us. For those that don't know your podcast, what is it one more time?
So it's called CISO Tradecraft, CISO Tradecraft.com. You can find us on about 11 podcast channels as well as YouTube. And we've got 42,000 subscribers, and we'd love to have you add to it. And of course, the idea is you can learn a little bit more about your career development, a little bit more about how to do your job better, and hopefully help you out in your career.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, that's G. Mark Hardy. I'm Raf, James, Jim, and for another fun episode, thanks for joining us, you guys. We will catch you another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. See you later. Bye-bye.
Take care.